Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Valley Bible Studies Podcast.
Hey, that's us.
Yeah. It's good to have you with us for episode 3.
Or 3.5
Well,
if you count the bonus.
Yeah. Well, no, because it's a bonus, so it doesn't count as...
Okay, so 3.
Yeah, so
episode 3.
Thank you very much.
Okay, sorry.
We're really stoked to get into Luke because Luke's awesome. The book, not the person.
Thank you.
But no, the other point is because we got Luke here with us.
Hey.
So
not the gospel writer. That'd be awesome, cool. But no.
That would also raise a lot of questions.
Him. Yeah.
We couldn't. He was unavailable.
Yeah.
So as we go into Luke, we're actually going to jump a few chapters in. Typically, what we do is, we kind of go just through the entirety of the book. But Luke
is long.
Dude, Luke's got so much to unpack.
It's less chapters than Matthew, but it's much longer.
But because one of the reasons we're going a little bit deeper into it is because a lot of it's kind of already talked about.
Right. Just
from either one, a different perspective, or two, it's just said in a different way.
Matthew and Mark and Luke share a lot of similar content.
Right. And so for the first, 10 chapters?
The first several. I mean, you've got a different birth narrative in chapters 1 and 2 than Matthew's does.
The Sermon on the Mount's a little different.
And the Sermon on the Mount's packaged differently, but it's a lot of the same stuff.
It's a lot of the same stuff. A lot of the topics we've already hit.
Right.
And so as we go into Luke, what we're really going to try to do is look at the things that you're really only going to find in Luke.
Right. Which there are several.
Yeah. And then, but the cool thing is that, I don't know, all of them really just tie in together.
Right. All of them have their own stuff that's unique to them, but it's one story.
Right. Yeah. So to kickstart that, it's going to be formatted kind of similarly to the bonus episode that was released a couple of weeks ago.
We're going to go back and forth with our special things.
Yeah, and so Luke's going to start us off.
That's me.
That is,
and the book. All right. Chapter 10 is where I would like to start. My first.
I'm not a betting man, but I would put money that that's not going to be the last time that you say that.
No, absolutely not.
Yeah.
We're also going to cover Acts here in a few weeks, which is also written by Luke, so I get a sequel. So we'll come back to it. But anyway, Luke chapter 10. That's where I would like to start.
Okay.
So the corpus of this, the center of the story we're going to tell.
Word of the day, corpus.
Thank you. Is actually a story that is told in the other Gospels, but what's interesting is Matthew and Mark put it in a different place. So Jesus evidently says this more than once over the course of his ministry, but Matthew and Mark put it at the end. Matthew and Mark say he said this, the saying of this that they record is during that last week of Jesus' life while he's there in Jerusalem. And we're going to talk about that some more when we get there. But Matthew and Mark put it there. Luke puts it earlier. He's still on the road to Jerusalem because that path starts in chapter 9. But in chapter 10, starting in verse 25, says, "And behold, a certain lawyer stood up and tested him," Jesus, saying, "Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life?" Jesus said to him, "What is written in the law? What is your reading of it?" So he answered and said, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself." And Jesus said to him, "You've answered rightly. Do this and you will live." So it's interesting. The first difference between Matthew and Mark's telling and Luke's telling of this encounter is in Matthew and Mark, Jesus says this himself. He's the one who's asked the question, and Jesus says that these are the commandments that sum up the law. In this case, the lawyer that's asking him the question comes up with it himself, which might mean that this is a really good lawyer who actually has studied the word and has come to that right conclusion, or it might mean that Jesus has already been saying this. So this is one of those things that people just know Jesus talks about a lot, is that these are the foundations of the old law. Either way, that's the right answer. But he, back to the lawyer, and this is verse 29, but he, wanting to justify himself, said to Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" And then Jesus answered and said, "A certain man went down from Jerusalem to Jericho, fell among thieves, who stripped him of his clothing, wounded him, and departed, leaving him half dead. Now by chance a certain priest came down that road." Priest. This guy's important. This is one of the people who is responsible for the religion of the Jewish people. This is one of the people responsible for the special sacrifices, responsible for the special rituals. This is somebody who keeps people close to God in the Jewish mindset. When he saw the guy laying on the side of the road, the priest passed by on the other side. Likewise, a Levite. So Levites work with the priests. They're the guys who take care of the temple. They're the guys who take care of the holy items that were used for the ceremonies when they're not being used, that kind of thing. A Levite, when he arrived at the place, came and looked and passed by on the other side. But a certain Samaritan. Samaritans were outcasts to the Jews. Samaritans were the result of the Jews who were in captivity coming back and intermarrying with the Canaanites again once they had come back from captivity. And they also bear a lot of the responsibility for the sins of the northern kingdom, which there's a whole Old Testament storyline there. But Samaritans, not liked. Samaritans, outcasts. Samaritans, seen as one of the Jews' enemies living in their own homeland. A Samaritan, as he journeyed, came where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion. So he went to him, bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine, set him on his own animal, brought him to an inn, took care of him. On the next day when he departed, he took out 2 denarii, so this is 2 days' worth of money, gave them to the innkeeper, said to him, "Take care of him, whatever more you spend, when I come again I will repay you." Which of these 3, Jesus says, do you think was neighbor to the one who fell among the thieves? The lawyer says, "He who showed mercy on him," and Jesus said, "Go and do likewise." That's the whole gospel. Like, if you summarized it in a story, you could argue that that's it right there. Because first, Jesus is the person who you wouldn't expect to be nice to you, to have mercy and compassion on you. The people during his day didn't expect it because he's a guy from Nazareth. Nobody from Nazareth is supposed to be worth anything. And we wouldn't expect it either because we don't value him at all, or because we value him too much. Sometimes we say that we can't value Jesus too much, but we say, he's God. Why would he have anything to do with me? Because he's so holy, we don't expect him to have anything to do with us and our redemption. So Jesus crosses that barrier and says, I'm going to have mercy on you even when you don't expect it. And then as we live out the gospel, the center of our love for people that he showed us how to do is, I'm going to have mercy and love towards people who don't expect it. That's the center of the gospel. If you want to talk about Jesus as a teacher, which Luke does, that's the theme, that's it. The first and one of the biggest lessons is turning the idea that we have of what love should look like on its head and saying, no, you love everybody. It's just, that's it. That's the gospel.
I really appreciate as a teacher, like a high school teacher, the way Jesus teaches. Mm-hmm. Because it's if you just flat out tell people the answer, a lot of times they're going to try to, they might not understand it. Like, it might just not click with them. It might be too much for them to process and really understand. Or 2, it might, they might interpret it or understand it in the incorrect way.
Right.
And as a teacher, one of the things that I like to do is like, okay, well, let me explain it like this. And then you either tell a story or you give an example or something to that effect. And Jesus does that like all the time. Like all the time.
That's what Luke is about. Like,
right.
Luke, he's the master teacher.
And in this example, the lawyer who is looking for a specific answer, he's trying, because it says it at the beginning, he's trying to justify it. Mm-hmm. And so he's looking for a very specific answer from Jesus. And so Jesus isn't going to give them that, because if he tells them right out the correct answer,
the lawyer's going to have a comeback.
Right. He's going to deny it. He's going to have something else to say, some sort of rebuttal, something to that effect. But with Jesus's answer being a story, the lawyer has to kind of figure it out himself. Mm-hmm. And he does. Well, who's going to be the one that, who's the one that was right?
Right.
So, that guy. And I love that. And I really appreciate that, and it kind of, it carries over to my point in Luke chapter 15, because it's another story. It's
fantastic stories.
And so in Luke chapter 15, again, there's a lot, but The one I'd like to key in on is the one of the prodigal son, the one of the lost son. And so most people, when they read this, they're going to focus on the prodigal son. They're going to focus on the lost son.
And just for like trivia question, there are studies that have been done about which parables of Jesus are the most well known. Even if people aren't Christians or don't read the Bible, like which stories do you know that Jesus told? This is number one.
I was going to yeah.
Prodigal son is, in almost every study, it's number one, and it's not really close.
Well, and you hear people like, it's the prodigal son has returned.
Right.
They're not even talking about the prodigal son from the Bible. That's their reference.
It's just a saying.
Right. And so they, this is where it's from.
Right.
And so a lot of people, when they study this, when they look at this, they really key in on the son, mm-hmm. the prodigal son, the one that left. So the father has an inheritance for both of his sons. The younger son says, I want it now. I want to go live. I want to do the stuff that I want to do. I want to go and then, whatever that might be, party, live my life to the fullest, spend it on what I want to spend it on.
Not think about home or dad or the older brother or anything in that.
And as a younger brother, like I kind of get it. Because the older brother, typically, you're the oldest.
I am the oldest.
The older brother typically is the one that assumes a lot of responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
And
third parent syndrome.
Yeah, almost. And so that older sibling, they're the ones that do that because, that's just kind of how they were raised.
Mm-hmm.
To where the younger son, well, they see the older sibling handling those responsibilities, and they get a little bit of leeway. They get a little bit of time to themselves. They get a little bit extra time to think. They get a little extra attention because, well, guess what? The older son has responsibilities. Well, now the parents get to spend a little more time and attention on the younger one.
For better or worse, that's just how it works a lot of the time.
It is. And I have an older brother. I can almost guarantee you he would agree with that. I also have a little brother, and so I kind of get both sides of it. I got some extra attention that my older brother didn't get, but then when we had when my parents had my little brother, there's a 7-age gap difference. Man, was that different. And so I had to go from the one that didn't really have too many responsibilities to, you got some responsibilities
mm-hmm.
now. And so the mindset of, I don't have as many responsibilities, so I can kind of do what I want.
It's easy for anybody to fall into, and especially if you're in that family dynamic.
Exactly. And so that younger brother said, well, I don't really want all those responsibilities. I don't want to think about them. I don't want to think of home.
See ya.
I want to go do what I want to do. And that's exactly what he did. The father gave him his inheritance, and he split. It didn't last long. The inheritance, that is. But the way I want to look at this parable is actually through the lens of all three people involved.
It's really three parables in one. If you
it
think
kind
about
of is. And so you have the prodigal son, the one that left, and the one and eventually returned. You have the older son, and then you have the father.
Which is interesting because if you look at the very beginning of Luke 15, the beginning of when he starts talking in these parables at all, what it says is that he is with sinners, like he's currently associating with Pharisees or with sinners and tax collectors.
Yep.
And the Pharisees show up and say, why is he bothering with the sinners and the tax collectors? Doesn't he know? That kind of thing.
And how does he explain it?
And he explains it with a story.
Yep.
And he incorporates all three perspectives in one.
Yeah, and
he's talking to everybody there.
Exactly. And so with the younger son, he got lost. And he was lost because of his selfish ambition. He wanted to do things his way, and that's how he went about it. But the father led him. The older son, he was kind of lost because of jealousy and anger with the father because he thought he wasn't getting the attention that he deserved because he was doing everything right in his eyes, right? But
one of the messages of this is it's not about getting everything right from your own perspective.
Right. But here's the thing. But then the father, he let him. He let him get jealous. He let him get angry because he saw the older son as like, you're your own person. I'm here for you.
Mm-hmm.
The father was there for both of his sons whenever they needed him.
He loved them enough both to let them do what they wanted to do, to give them the free will to do it, but also to show them the right way and to be there for them when they figured it out.
He let them experience it. Yeah.
Right.
And that's where you learn. You learn through your experiences. You can learn a variety of ways, but you get the best understanding when you experience it yourself. And so when the son returns, guess what? The father's there with open arms. When the older son, calms down, kind of gets the bigger picture, the father's there with open arms. And it's the exact same for us, man. When we leave, for the people that think that they're too far gone,
there's no such thing.
When the people that I've done so many horrible things, I'm doing so many horrible things, God has open arms. For the ones who seem to have everything going right, but there's just a little bit of anger and frustration because you're doing everything right, but maybe some things are off. Maybe some things aren't going the way that they should be going, but you've done everything right.
And there's also the case of the person who does everything right, but for the wrong reasons.
Yeah. All in all, at the very end of the day, God's there with open arms.
Yep. And again, that's the whole gospel.
Mm-hmm.
We just have to be willing to accept it the right way. The way we have to be able to come back home, to his home, the way that he's designed it.
A lot of people have, those people that they grow up in their hometown and
stay there forever.
So, okay, I was going to go the other way around. Some people stay forever because they're comfortable. Mm-hmm. That's what they know and that's what they like. Then that's, go for it. But then there's also the people that they grow up in their hometown and then when they graduate high school or when it's time to, grow up and do whatever,
they're gone.
They're like, I am out of this place. Mm-hmm. I'm peace out, y'all. And maybe they go to a city, maybe they go to college, maybe they go and, try to fulfill some sort of dream. I hope they live out that dream. I hope they get what they're looking for, But at the same time, home is always going to be
safe.
Yeah.
It's sort of like the net that catches you when you fall.
You can always, because there's always something about going back to your mom's house.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Even after I've been married for 5 years, I haven't lived in my parents' house in over a decade. But I always feel a sense of love, like nostalgic love and comfort whenever I go back to my parents' house.
Yep.
And that's what God is.
That's one of the things that the gospel offers, and that's the reason the church exists.
Yeah.
The church is the ultimate home for people who need one.
Amen.
Yep. All right, so next chapter over is my next block that I wanted to cover. This is Luke chapter 16. And this is what's called the story of the rich man and Lazarus. So, beginning in verse 19 of chapter 16. The point here is very simple. I think it's one of the simpler stories that Jesus tells in terms of like the implication.
Yeah, it's pretty straightforward.
But there's something here that I think we might disagree on. You and I disagree that I want to get into. So
this was for everyone listening. This was not mentioned.
This is the first time that I've told him this. Yeah. So here we go.
This ought to be fun.
Starting in verse 19. There's a certain rich man who was clothed in purple and fine linen and fared sumptuously every day. But there was a certain beggar named Lazarus, full of sores, who was laid at his gate, desiring to be fed with the crumbs which fell from the rich man's table. Moreover, the dogs came and licked his sores. Not a great situation. So it was that Lazarus died, and was carried by the angels to Abraham's bosom. The rich man also died and was buried. And being in torments in Hades, he lifted up his eyes and saw Abraham afar off and Lazarus in his bosom. Then he cried and said, Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus that he may dip the tip of his finger in water, and cool my tongue, for I am tormented in this flame. But Abraham said, Son, remember that in your lifetime you received your good things, and likewise Lazarus evil things. But now he is comforted, and you are tormented. Besides all this, between us and you there is a great gulf fixed, so that those who want to pass from here to you cannot, nor can those from there pass to us. Then he said, I beg you therefore, Father, that you would send him to my father's house, for I have 5 brothers, that he may testify to them, lest they also come to this place of torment. Abraham said, They have Moses and the prophets, let him hear them. And he said, No, Father Abraham, but if one goes to them from the dead, they will repent. But he said to them, If they do not hear Moses and the prophets, neither will they be persuaded, though one rise from the dead. First of all, if you're a Christian and you hear that last statement and you know how the gospel ends, that is a harrowing statement. If I'm not going to listen to the gospel, if I'm not going to listen to the scriptures, if I'm not going to listen to Moses and Abraham and the prophets and everything that the Bible has for me to offer for me already, Jesus raising from the dead isn't going to change anything. You can't have Jesus without the Bible. You can't have Jesus without the church. If you're not going to listen to the gospel just as it's presented, it's sort of the, like, why don't miracles exist today question. The answer is because they wouldn't really do anything.
Yeah.
Like, you're going to accept Jesus or you're going to reject him regardless of whether miracles are in play.
Well, so I forget where I heard it originally, but it was basically that, like, when you hear the trumpets, when he comes back, it's too late.
Yeah.
Like,
But
what's going to happen is going to happen.
But until that moment, one of the points of this parable is I'm not going to change my behavior just because something extraordinary happens, like a miracle that I can see.
You're going to do what you want to do.
Right.
Yeah.
It's just, does Jesus rising from the dead and this, like, the Bible, does the story of the Bible mean so much to me that it will move me even though I've never seen it? Even though I wasn't there 2,000 years ago for this to happen, is it still moving to me in the same way? That's one of the points. The straightforward point is, you know, if you just live how you want to live, if you do the prodigal son thing and don't come home, and if you're the rich man in this story, not going to work out. Whereas, if you're Lazarus, if you're humble to the point that you would rather be known as humble than be known as the rich man, you're going to be exalted. One of the key phrases in Jesus' ministry, the high places will be brought low, the low places will be exalted. The one who humbles himself will be exalted, the one who exalts himself will be humble. That's just the way it works.
Okay. Where are we going to disagree?
Okay,
I'm so intrigued.
So here's where we're going to disagree.
This and you story, know that we're going to disagree.
I'm pretty sure.
Man.
This story, right?
Okay.
Sets up a view of the afterlife.
Okay,
right?
Yeah.
So you've got paradise and torment in the story.
With a gulf in between.
Yeah. And what people have said based on this is that you don't actually go to heaven or hell when you die.
Okay.
You go to paradise or torment. Those are like a holding place in what's called the Hadean realm, which is a term that's thrown around.
And then there's also Tartarus.
When judgment comes, Tartarus is like the Greek version of that, and
Correct.
It's also known as it's meant to be, in this conception that people have built, it's the opposite of paradise. So paradise is the good one, Tartarus is the bad one.
Correct.
And then at judgment, you go to heaven and hell.
Okay.
I don't think that's true.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure that this is a thought experiment that is not meant to be taken literally. I'm pretty sure that a holding place called the Hadean realm doesn't exist. Couple things. Number one, I'm concerned when people want to base an entire theological drift on one passage. So, like, another example of this...
And this is the passage you're referring to?
Yes, this is the passage. Like, this is the only time that this Hadean realm is referred to. Only time it's ever mentioned. Other than the word paradise, which we'll get to. But another version of this is... I had a parallel case that would... But my point is, it's a red flag to me when one passage affects your view of everything else. Like, the afterlife, the concept of heaven and hell, is solid. Like, that's baked into the Bible from Genesis to Revelation. Yeah. That's just there. This is the one Hadean realm passage. And it's in sort of a parable thought experiment context.
To where it might not be taken literally.
To where it might not be literal. I just thought of my parallel. So, like, story of Jephthah, which if you know the story of Jephthah, this will make sense to you. Why let the story of Jephthah in isolation, which is in its own specific context, skew my view of the entire biblical theme of mercy and judgment, right? Mercy and judgment and the relationship between those two are baked into the whole thing. Genesis to Revelation, you can't get around it. The story of Jephthah is there for a reason, but I don't think it's there to affect the entire view that is pinned down in so many other places of what mercy and judgment mean. Same thing here. This is here for a reason. This story is told for a reason. But it seems dangerous to me to parse out an entire literal understanding of what the Hadean or what the afterlife looks like, called the Hadean realm, from this one passage, especially considering the context.
So your connection is that the reason it's being told is so that we can see the severity of hell.
Yes. It's the severity. It's the consequences of your actions will follow you. Bad actions have severe consequences. Humility has beneficial consequences. And there is a difference that is not overcome.
Here's the thing.
But I don't think you can take an entire literal understanding of the afterlife from that. I may be wrong. Maybe the afterlife looks exactly like the Hadean realm that Jesus paints a picture of here. I'm not claiming that I know what this 100%. I'm just saying, the point I'm making is it's dangerous to use one passage to build your whole theology.
I respect that statement. I do. The thing, this might sound, I don't know. I don't want to be taken wrong here, and I don't want people to view me in a different light from this. When it comes to whether or not there's in that waiting place, if it is a paradise and a Hades, or if you just go straight to heaven or hell, or if it just goes black for a while, things are dark until Judgment Day. I don't care.
Right. That was my other point. Does it really matter that much?
Because here's the thing. All right, so we'll say that it is literal. We'll say that this passage right here in chapter 16, say it is correct, and there is a Hadean realm and paradise.
It's correct. I don't think Jesus is misrepresenting things.
No. I just meant before judgment.
It's not literal.
Right. It's not the waiting place.
Right.
Let's say that's the key. Okay, cool. It's not going to change.
It doesn't really change.
It's not going to change judgment.
Right. It doesn't change any of the rest of the scope.
If that's not real, if that's just the example that we're given, and you kind of just things go dark before Judgment Day, and you literally are just waiting. Nothing's really happening. You're just waiting. Okay, I'm fine with that too, because I know this is, and like you said, this is the thing that is 100% concrete from the Bible. There will be a Judgment Day.
Yep.
You die, Judgment Day.
Yep.
What happens in between isn't going to change what's going to happen on Judgment Day.
Right.
And I'm okay with that.
Right. It doesn't really change the scope of the biblical message. It's just a way, the main point that I'm making is, don't base your whole theology on one passage
of the afterlife.
And don't let one passage skew a biblical understanding that's foundational to the rest.
No, I respect that. I'd never looked at that way before. I never really thought about it.
Right.
Because like you said, I viewed the afterlife as, and honestly, I don't really know if you've skewed my opinion on that. Of you die, you go to one of those waiting places, and then you have Judgment Day.
And that may be exactly what it is. The point is, it doesn't matter to me.
Right. Like I was saying, I don't care.
I'm not going to change my behavior.
Exactly.
Based on that.
I'm not going to change who I am and what I'm doing with my life to serve God.
Right.
Because there may or may not be a waiting place.
Whether or not there's a waiting place, there is a paradise.
Yeah.
Paradise is used 3 times, all in the New Testament, and the word that's used is a word that comes from Persian that means walled garden.
That sounds nice.
That's Eden. If you think about a walled garden, Garden of Eden, very beginning. Paradise is the return to Eden. It's the return to a reality where God is there, you're safe and provided for.
That sounds nice.
And I don't care what that looks like, I want it.
Yeah.
That's the point.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
Cool, man. So that's something to think about. And the cool thing about the fact that it is something to think about, it's not going to change what the gospel is.
Right.
And what's going to get us there.
Right.
Yeah. All right. So going forward 4 chapters to chapter 20.
Chapter 20.
So Jesus, he has his triumphal entry. He cleanses the temple. And what that does, like that kind of, you said it before.
There's no going back after
that. Like that, it kind of sealed his fate.
Yep.
His fate was already sealed, but in
the Jews' eyes.
Yes, to those.
There's no going back.
Right, to those on earth, to the Jews, they were like, well, yep, that's going to happen now.
Yep.
In terms of Jesus' fate on earth. But in chapter 20, the chief priests, the scribes,
the regular suspects,
and the elders, so they ask him about Jesus' authority. This is a big topic for me.
Mm-hmm.
This is something that I just... This is why there's so much division.
Yep.
Because it's all rooted around authority.
It's all a question of who's in charge.
Right. And
whose authority matters.
And so Jesus is... He does these things. He cleanses his temple. And so they ask him, tell us... This is verse 2 of chapter 20. Tell us, by what authority are you doing these things? Or who is he who gave you this authority? So, like, where are you getting it from? If somebody gave it to you, who is it? Because we want to talk to him. Right? And Jesus... Now, Jesus does something that irks me sometimes in my life.
He does that once in a while, yeah.
Yeah. He answers a question with a question. And, like, just as a human being, that bugs me. But... I mean, I'm never, ever going to question Jesus, so let's roll with it. He says, verse 3, but he answered and he said to them, I also will ask you one thing, and answer me this. Okay? The baptism of John, was it from heaven or from men? And then...
Uh-oh.
Yeah, they're like, well, okay, now come on.
You want to talk about a catch-22?
Yeah, if we say... So they say in verse 5, okay, fine. If we say that it's from heaven... Okay, then why don't you believe him? But then if we say if it's from men in verse 6, then people are going to stone us, and they're going to be persuaded that John was a prophet. Okay, and then so in verse 7 they said, okay, we don't know. Jesus, we don't know. We can't answer your question. So then in verse 8, Jesus says to them, okay, well, I'm not going to tell you whose authority I do these things.
And the reason that's a catch-22 is because they do know.
Yeah, but they deny it.
They won't say it.
They deny it.
And what he's saying when he answers that way is, then you also know where my authority comes from.
Exactly. So here's the thing. All right, Luke, whose authority?
God's.
If literally anything we do in church, specifically, let's go worship. From whose authority are we doing it?
God's through Jesus.
God's through Jesus, right? So we sing. Whose authority?
God's through Jesus.
God's through Jesus. And we see that in where is it? Colossians chapter 3, okay, verse 18. I'm going to start in 15. 16. Yeah. What did I say? 18?
You said 18.
I said 18.
Start in 15. Go ahead and start.
I'm going to start in 15. It's 15, 16, and I'll even throw in 17. Right? Verse 15. And let the peace of God rule in your hearts, to which also you were called in one body, and be thankful. Verse 16. Let the word of Christ dwell in you richly in all wisdom, teaching and admonishing one another in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, singing with grace in our hearts to the Lord. We also see it in Ephesians 5:19. Okay? Speaking to one another in psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs. Songs of the Spirit. Sing and make music from your heart to the Lord. So, that is the authority that we've been given. That's the authority that God has told us that we are to what? Sing. I'm not very good at it, but if God tells me to do it, I'm going to do it. Not once did God tell me to get up there with a guitar or a piano or with drum set or with a choir. He told me to sing. And he told all of us to sing. That's how we're to do it.
Yeah, that's the other thing about it is that Paul, who's writing this, doesn't say... He doesn't qualify that. It's not to a specific group. It's not to a specific, like,
Those who have good voices sing.
Right. It's not that. It's
Nope.
If you are in worship,
That's what you do.
which is essential part of Christianity. You can't be a Christian and not participate in the church's worship. That's just the way it works. And if you're going to be in that corporate worship setting, this is the authority, this is the precedent.
And this is where I go with instruments, right? At some point in time, someone said, "Hey, let's throw this in there."
The point in time was 600 AD.
It would make it sound so good. It would sound great. People would get involved. They'd love it. Somebody else put that into place. Somebody else gave the authority to put something new in worship, and it wasn't God through Jesus. When we add anything extra to worship,
it's not just adding things new, because like a PowerPoint's new, right? Like church buildings are new. It's something new that is explicitly against, like explicitly adds to the authority.
Right. That wasn't given from God
right
through Jesus.
Like there's a difference between a PowerPoint and pews, which are tools to like get us all together in one place and tools to share. Like the PowerPoint is used largely in our worship to put the words up there so everybody can sing. Like
right.
That's a tool to include everybody.
Those are tools.
Right.
Yes. Those are things to, I don't want to, maybe enhance or
not enhance,
to help,
but to make inclusive.
Yeah.
To let everybody be a part
of the things
of the authoritative things.
Exactly. There are so many other things that have been added, that have been put in place in worship that God didn't.
That aren't in the New Testament anywhere.
That God did not give the green light to.
Yep.
Another one of those is women in worship, right? Women can worship. Women they have to worship, okay? But it's in how they do it. Right? So in 1 Corinthians, right? No, excuse me, 1 Timothy. In 1 Timothy, right, we see, let me get there because I had it. There it is. In 1 Timothy chapter 2, and if you look at verses 11 and 12, okay? Let a woman learn in silence and with all submission. And I do not permit a woman to teach or to have authority over a man. Now,
culture has just gone nuts on you. By the way.
I know. But give me a second to explain myself.
Well, I'm just saying. I
but
agree with you. It's
right,
just a reality.
But to be in silence. Here's the thing. If I were to stop and say, and I do not permit a woman to teach, and that's it. I could see that as problematic.
Right.
But it's to have authority or to have authority over a man.
Now, it does need to be clarified that this is corporate.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
Like,
so and that's kind of my point, right? All of us that grew up going to Bible class. When we were little kids, right? So, if you went to Bible class as a little kid, more likely than not, it was one of your friends' moms, maybe your mom, some nice lady from your congregation that taught you the basics of the Bible in your Bible class.
Mm-hmm. And it even goes a lot further than that, like benevolence. Mm-hmm. Our ladies here at Westside are phenomenal at the benevolence and the things that they do for people.
You're not kidding.
Like, cannot give them enough praise for that kind of stuff.
But the scripture, what it's telling us here is
in corporate worship,
authority over a man.
Right.
Women still sing during worship. Women still partake of the communion during worship.
It's not like Jesus doesn't want women to be Christians. Like, that's not how it works.
It's not an anti-feminist thing. It's not sexist.
Think about how many women contributed to Jesus' ministry. Think about how many women Jesus had a special relationship with, like Mary, Martha, his own mom, Mary Magdalene. There were a lot of Marys. Several women that like define parts of his ministry. And it's not like he wants to. It's not like he gets to the end of his ministry and then says, "Oh, by the way, the women who have been on this journey with me this whole time, you're now secondary."
That's not what. Yeah, exactly. That's not what's happening. And if we're being honest, I'm not a better Christian than my wife because I'm a man.
Exactly.
And I would not be a Christian if it wasn't for my wife. I can say that confidently. Sorry, Mom. I would have. Who knows
you
what?
You could probably also say it about your mom.
Yeah, of course. But when I left the house, when I grew up and left home, who knows what I would have done?
Right.
My wife put me on the right track.
Love you, Sid.
And yeah, no kidding. Love you, honey. I'm not a better Christian because I'm a man. In corporate worship, I'm allowed to go up and conduct service because I'm a man. But the only reason I'm able to do that is because God, through Jesus, has given me that authority.
It's a difference in roles, not a difference in value.
Exactly.
The only metric for am I a quote-unquote good Christian is how closely do I follow Jesus?
Yeah.
That's it.
Man, woman, it does not matter.
Doesn't matter. But there's a difference in roles that we've been prescribed.
But what it boils down to is authority.
Right.
And a lot of people have a lot of trouble grasping that.
And it is tough because it goes again. I mean, the culture in which we live, the culture in which we've been raised.
Dude, it's 2024.
It's tough.
Which
still doesn't sound right, by the way.
If anybody tells a woman that they can't do something, how dare you?
Yep.
But under what authority?
Right. And the other sort of qualm I have with that mindset is if the argument is because women can't participate in worship, or no, they can participate in worship, because they can't lead worship, that means that they're being restrained. So when that's the argument, when that's the path of argument, you've now put a value marker on leading in worship. There are men who don't lead in worship, but you don't call them restrained.
Right.
And the bigger point is, it's not about who's leading. It's about what's being said.
We said that in
the bonus episode in Matthew. But that's
it's the same
point.
thing. It's the same exact thing.
Exactly.
You can be taught from a woman. You can be taught from anybody, man or woman, but it's not about who is teaching. It's about what's being taught.
And those who are arguing against the authority of God that women have an equal role in worship as far as leadership goes are placing way too much value on
the who.
Mm-hmm. And not on the why.
Right.
It's the authoritative pattern. It doesn't have to make sense to me. I'm just going to do it.
And there is so much more that we could say. And it probably, for those listening, it probably sounds horrible from this coming from me. Saying saying that women can't lead in worship. It's not that they can't. It's just that they weren't picked to do it.
Right.
And people could easily say, well, you can say that because you're a guy.
Well, it's not up to us.
Exactly. I'm not really the one saying it. I'm the one pointing it out.
Right. Somebody's got to.
All right. Can we go to your next point, please?
Yeah, all right. Fair enough. All right. This is our last point, I think, on this one, and it's from Luke chapter 22. This is the end. In a lot of ways, very literally. The point that I wanted to make is probably the simplest one that we've made so far, but it's based on the Garden of Gethsemane. So this is chapter 22, verse 39. Coming out from that place, he went to the Mount of Olives. Mount of Olives is somewhere he's been before. Mount of Olives is somewhere he's taken his disciples before. This is a place that they're intimately familiar with. As he was accustomed, his disciples went with him. When he came to the place, he said to them, "Pray that you may not enter into temptation." And he was withdrawn from them about a stone's throw, and he knelt down and prayed, saying, "Father, if it is your will, take this cup away from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done." Then an angel appeared to him from heaven, strengthening him. And being in agony, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat became like great drops of blood falling down to the ground. When he rose from prayer and had came to his disciples, he found them sleeping from sorrow. And he said to them, "Why do you sleep? Rise and pray, lest you enter into temptation." First of all,
that's a lot to unpack.
That is one of the most moving passages in the Bible to me.
Yeah.
Because even before you get to the cross, even before you get to the reality of the excruciating pain. There's the emotional and the spiritual weight of, from Jesus' perspective, he's thinking to himself, I have the salvation of mankind on my shoulders. Mm-hmm. And I know what it's going to take to fulfill that. And I really, 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 really don't want to do it. But I have to.
Yep.
That's tough. It's a lot to realize, and it reminds me of how much I owe him. Because if he hadn't done that, it would have been on my shoulders. Like, I would have to be the one carrying that weight. But he carries it for me. There's also, he specifically prays, take this cup away from me. Let this cup pass from me.
He doesn't want to do it.
He doesn't want to do it. But
and you can't blame him.
The symbol itself, Psalm 75 talks about this. I think it's 75. And Jeremiah talks about this. They both talk about a cup of wrath. And it says the cup of wrath that in God's hand is strong and unmixed. And in Jeremiah, he talks about the fact that that cup has to be poured out on the nations. At some point, the cup of God's wrath is going to be poured out on earth. And Jesus says, let this cup pass from me, but if not, let your will be done. It's not just like...
Well, he also says, so...
I think the bigger point is...
not my will.
Right. But I think the bigger point is that God's wrath is real.
Oh, yeah.
You know, like, sin is no joke. God's wrath towards sin is no joke. But as real as God's wrath is, what's the one thing that has stayed his hand? It's the love that's willing to make the ultimate sacrifice. The only solution to the sin problem is Jesus' love.
Well, and also think about it, like, Jesus needed more. His sweat turned to drops of blood. He was so anxious. He was so worried, or like drops of blood. And after he prayed, an angel had to come to help strengthen him. Physically, his human body couldn't do it alone. Mm-hmm. It was falling apart. He was falling apart. Mentally, physically, it was, debilitating him. Mm-hmm. And an angel had to come and strengthen him.
But there's another message there, too. Because when I feel like I'm falling apart, God is still there present with me. That's a lot to take in. But it's just, it reminds me of why I'm a Christian.
Yeah.
I am not a Christian because I think that Christianity is more right than anything else. Now, I do think it's more right than anything else, but that's not my primary motivation. I'm not a Christian because I think being a Christian gets me some sort of clout or like strokes my ego.
Yeah.
I'm a Christian because Jesus loves me that much. And the only shot that I've got is that he loves me that much and he teaches me how to love other people that much.
It's the only way.
It's the only way. And then the resurrection. It doesn't have to end there either because there's still hope even on the other side of that kind of sacrifice.
Because after all the things that he went through, after all the pain, after all the suffering, like if somebody forced me to go through a certain type of pain and suffering, I wouldn't want to talk to that person for a while. I wouldn't want to be around them. You know, if you pushed me down a flight of stairs, you and I wouldn't talk for a few months.
And Jesus's reaction is immediately come back and start proclaiming the salvation.
Yep.
The message of salvation to the people that put him there.
Because throughout the whole time,
that's what he was for.
He loved.
That's what he was doing it for.
Yep.
Yep. The gospel's awesome.
Best story ever.
Yep. It really is.
And it's true.
And it's true.
A lot of the stories that you and I like are not, they're very fictional.
But this one's true.
This one's true.
And it's the best one.
Yep. Y'all.
That's 3 gospels down.
Boom.
One more.
One more to go. 3 down, 1 to go.
And it's the weird one. In terms of, yeah, it's different than the other 3.
Yeah, if there was one that stuck out.
John, for sure.
It's John.
So we'll see you for that in 2 weeks.
Looking forward to it. We appreciate you listening in. If you have, here's the thing. If you have questions, comments, concerns, inquiries, check out our webpage, valleyiblestudies.com.
That's us.
So on there,
If you want to get a hold of us to have a study, a personal study, if you want written studies that you can go through,
if you have
want
questions,
to just ask us about questions you have, there's a contact page. That's where all our stuff is.
And we're more than happy to respond.
Absolutely.
To talk to you and to get some thoughts and really just have a conversation with you.
Yeah. We don't want the conversation to end here. We would love to talk more with you.
Don't let us do all the talking.
Yeah, honestly. Yeah. Which we're good at, so we need extra help.
Are we good at it?
We're good at doing the talking.
We do it. But
the quality's up to you. Yeah, we do a lot of it.
Yeah, we look forward to talking with you there. So check out the webpage, valleyiblestudies.com. Check out the TikTok, check out the Facebook, check out the Instagram. And we look forward to seeing you there.
Yeah.
Love you guys.
See you and John.